Thank you so much. And boy, it has been quite an exciting couple of days so far, and I'm really happy to be here to talk to you about this a little bit. And I'm going to take a little bit different approach than some of the others because we're perhaps at a different place in our journey than some of the others you've heard from today. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about how Cargill has been coming through this journey, where we are on it, where we're going to go, how C3 came into the picture, what we're doing with them. But before I go there, I think maybe it's best for me first to give you a little bit of an introduction to Cargill, because many of you have probably heard the name Cargill, maybe have some idea of Cargill, but my guess is that what Cargill really is and does might be something more than you've heard up to this point. And so what you see up here is a little bit of a summary of what Cargill's businesses look like. But the thing that I want to start with is our purpose. And this is one of the things I love about Cargill, because we're here to help nourish the world in a safe, responsible, and sustainable way. And I'm going to go into that a little bit because, some folks have talked about what's the future look like. And something that's really important for us to recognize is today on this planet, there's roughly 7.9 billion people. Over the next 30 years, that's going to go up by 25%. Nearly 10 billion people on the planet. And as I think you guys have seen, it's not as easy as one might think to deliver food globally and to make sure that food scarcity is not an issue for people. So nourishing the world when there's 10 billion people is quite an amazing challenge that we need to help make sure that we're ready to meet. But it's not just meeting that challenge with all of the things that happened in supply chains that we've all seen with COVID, with the latest developments with the invasion in Ukraine, but it's how do you do it in the right way? And that safe piece of things is important to us. We have 155,000 people around the globe who help make that happen. And it's important to us that they go home to their families every day and that we invest in that. And there's technology applications that can help you with that, and AI can help you there. And the sustainable piece of things is probably one that's at the forefront of everybody's mind, because you think about those 10 billion people, you think about the resources that they're going to require, you think about the challenges that we have today across these supply chains in terms of what's happening with carbon emissions. How do you get to net zero? How do you reduce carbon emissions? When you think about what's happening with stressed watersheds and what's required for food production, and how do you manage that as you go through this? If you think about land use and what we see with deforestation and trying to make sure that that isn't something that's happening in our supply chains, those are all real challenges when you think about feeding 25% more people on the planet. And then there's the responsible piece of things. Think about the people who are doing that work to grow those crops, the people who are helping move it around the globe. How do we make sure that we're doing the right thing to improve farmer livelihoods? How are we doing the right things to make sure that we don't have human rights violations in our supply chains? These are all real, pertinent issues that we need to address today and for the future when we think about these big global supply chains. And so let me talk a little bit about what our big global supply chains look like, because this is where I think many people may not realize what Cargill brings to the globe. And so what you can see here is that we are a fairly mature company. We've been around, it's actually going to be 157 years this year. And we started in the grain trading and storage business. And we've expanded out now, and we have operations in 70 countries, around 1,000 facilities actually, so pretty significant manufacturing footprint. We store materials in nearly 10,000 locations around the globe, so a pretty complex network across the globe. Now, as a supply chain guy, I will argue that 10,000 is probably not the right number, but we're working on it. And we're in multiple areas beyond just the grain that we started in. So you can see here, we're in the agriculture for sure. And so the earlier slide today with the agricultural revolution as the start, moving up into industrial, moving up into AI, it's kind of fun to see it looping back around to impact the agricultural piece of things again. We're very much into food production. So it's taking that agricultural product and actually translating it into something that people, or as you can see on the next place, their animals may need to consume. And we're also in the financial and industrial side of things, because in order to make all these global flows happen, as you can imagine, there's risk management involved in this, there's financing involved in this, so global trade flows are quite complex, and so we have a lot of insights and we work there as well. And we're a pretty good sized company as well. So last year, a little over $134 billion in revenue. That would put us in the Fortune 20. But what's really interesting is when you go down into how our businesses are structured, we have enterprises and groups within that, and virtually all of our groups on their own would be a Fortune 500 company. And so that starts to get really interesting and really complex to manage, which is why you start to need to think about, okay, well, what does enterprise AI mean in something like this? And how does it enable us to touch all the things that we need to touch in the most effective way possible from the end to end? And people mean different things when they say the end-to-end supply chain. In our case, it really is end-to-end. We are starting with the farmers, and we are ending with consumers, and we touch every type of business model in between. In addition to the fact that we do the agricultural piece of things and transform that into finished goods, I talked a little bit about, we are also providing a lot of insights, because as you can imagine, as you think across these supply chains, there is a significant amount of information that we have available to us as a result of being in these different places. And I'm going to talk through a few of them here in a minute. But the other thing that we're doing here is, we move a lot of things around the globe. And so as a result of that as well, we have pretty good insights into what's happening in all these different regions. So as I said, we had production in 70 countries. We sell into about 125 countries. What many people don't realize is that we're actually one of the larger ocean shippers. We actually charter 650 ships to move 200 million metric tons of product around the globe to bring things from areas of surplus to areas of need and deficit. So I'm going to kind of move this into more talking about the supply chain. There's the broader Cargill, and believe me, Cargill is very much a supply chain company. We have been from the beginning, and that is going to be at the core of what we do for as long as we're around. We have a lot of additional things that we bring to the table, but this is the core. But with these complex supply chains and with all of these different businesses, how do you actually create the most value across this? How do you think about the data that's in there and getting value? So imagine the types of problems that you're trying to solve at a supply chain level. So when you're trying to solve the problem of how do I get a specifically formulated pellet of fish feed that needs to hover at the right layer of the water for the salmon to want to eat it in Norway, how do I make sure that I get the right amount to the right feeding pen in the right fjord at the right time, avoiding the weather systems from a safety perspective, because we can't put crews in danger to go deliver that? That is a very different type of challenge to solve in your supply chain than thinking about how do I ensure that I have maximum safety and maximum effectiveness in mining rock salt from our mine to get it to the surface, to take it to the right municipality to ensure that when the winter storm comes, that we are able to keep the roads safe for people as they're driving, which is very different from what it looks like when you're trying to source tropical palm to bring it to Africa to make sure that they have the oils that they need to cook their food, or the beef supply chain, which is another one that we're in, where you're trying to figure out how to make sure that you've got the right animals coming in to meet the customer demand and that you're effectively able to get that very short shelf life product to the consumer or to the customer in the right time so that they have the amount of freshness left that they need for their application. So these are really interesting, challenging problems. And so when you start talking about enterprise AI, like, boy, we heard earlier today, there's a million different use cases that you could get after in this. But the trick is filtering through those and figuring out the data situation. Because what's going on underneath this is these are all independent businesses to some extent, but very connected. We've grown through organic growth, for sure, but we've also grown through quite a few acquisitions. So, like many of you, when you've done that, guess what? Your systems landscape is really, really challenging. your data governance and your data landscape, really, really challenging. And so we're trying to figure out the best way to get the most out of all of this information that we have across our systems. The other thing that we have an opportunity to do here is to figure out how to link these up more effectively. So if you think about the things I was talking about, where you've got the agricultural piece, you've got the animal feed piece, you've got the protein piece, all of those link together. So we run them independently, but we've got to figure out how to sync them up. So that's the next theme here, integration and connection. And I think within this, there's another piece of context that I probably need to set for you when we start talking about what integration across these businesses look like. Because today we do have them structured in an enterprise structure. So we're working in an integrated operating company model. But that's pretty recent for Cargill. 6 years ago, we actually changed the structure of the entire company. So prior to that, we called them platforms, but we essentially had over 70 businesses that ran really, truly quite independently. High-level oversight at the center, but each business unit had full autonomy to make decisions across all of the functional areas. So, that includes supply chain, of course, but, things like finance and HR and IT, all those were really at the discretion of the business for the most part. And so we've started to now bring that to the center, which starts to unlock the opportunity to do some of these things, because before that, it would have been really, really challenging. Not that I'm saying it's easy now. And so as we think about this integration, this is where the value will come from as we bring enterprise AI to life, is integrating across all of this. And so when we did that big shift in terms of the structure of the company, that was the first time we actually created a central supply chain organization as well. We call it Business Operations and Supply Chain. And that was the first time that anyone from the center started to try and influence how do we do things across our operations, within our supply chains, within our planning. We had some procurement, we had some transportation that was somewhat centrally led, but that was about it. And so from there, we came up with a 2025 strategy, which was very heavily around digital. We said, boy, we know that in this age, we need to be able to compete. We need to be able to be digital across not just our supply chains, but other components. And so we started to see investments being made to figure out how to start to connect this up. We have a great team of data scientists. We've been working on AI for a while. We have been looking at our asset footprint. We started there, as many of the companies that we've already heard from, very heavily asset-based. So again, we got 1,000 plants out there. So it makes sense that that'd be where we would start to focus our energy. Not the only place we went, though. So our data science teams have worked on projects around logistics and transportation optimization. They've worked on projects around forecasting. They've worked on reliability projects within our plants. And over the last couple of years, we started to really move forward on the smart manufacturing. We said, hey, this is the place we can go to leverage this data science skill set to drive a lot of value. And so that is where we came into working on smart manufacturing. So this was our first really significant program in the integrated supply chain that we went after. And we said, hey, there's really several things that we need to do across these 1,000 facilities. And of course, not all facilities are created equal. So some pilots were started at some of our larger facilities, more asset-intensive facilities. And this slide that you see up here is actually one of the slides that is shown at a facility as you go in and start to talk about the journey for smart manufacturing for that plant. And you can see that there's 3 kind of core areas that we're looking at here. So, advanced analytics is something that, we've heard a lot about over the last few days here. Digital operations. So this is that, enabling your workforce with technology and making sure they have the right information when they need it. And the last piece is the next-gen automation and controls. And we've been working on how do you go through, and many of our businesses started this, so it kind of started a little bit bottoms up, which is not surprising given the decentralized prior nature of the company. And so you start with these bottoms-up initiatives. But when you do that, that's where you start to hit some of the issues we've heard about in some of the earlier presentations of, well, okay, now you want to scale. How do you do that? You build it from the bottom up. And each time we did it, sometimes we did it with a consulting partner, sometimes we did it ourselves. They were done in different ways. And so now when I want to get the value across 1,000 plants, across different business units and different geographies for Cargill, that gets a little challenging. And in addition, as you start working on what's happening inside the fence line of the plant, you start to realize that what's happening inside the plant is pretty heavily influenced by what's happening outside the plant, what's outside the fence line. And you realize that we probably better think much more holistically about our end-to-end supply chains. And we really should be thinking about not just the smart manufacturing piece, which, by the way, is a critical component, is a major program in its own right, and is something that we're going to continue to drive. And you need to think about your intelligent supply chain. And this is where the enterprise AI conversation really started to come to life. And this is when we started talking to C3. And the first thing that we had to do with this is to figure out why. Why are we doing this? And it's really for us to enable a better customer outcome through better decision making. And we've got the customer at the center. You can see that in our little graph, under our little chart under the purpose there. The intelligent supply chain is wrapped around it, and it connects the plan, source, make, deliver. And in our earlier versions of slides, you would see more the linear model of plan, source, make, deliver, but I think most of you realize that that's not how things really work. It's got to be connected across. That is one of the key things that we need to do differently, is that this has got to be looked at as an ecosystem. It's got to be connected all the way around. Information has to be flowing in both directions and up and down. So that was where we started. And then we said, we need to be purposeful about what we're going to do here. And we need to say this in language that will resonate with all of these different businesses and all of these different regions, because if you're too specific, they go, well, okay, yeah, but that's the agricultural supply chain, or that's the feed guys over there. No, that doesn't apply to us. So we tried to pick 4 really core areas split into 2 different ways of thinking. So the first one is just the core enablement. All of you have been going on this journey. We're certainly still on it. Core enablement. Let's think about core systems. Do you have an ERP? You got to have a system of record. Do you have planning systems? Do you have MES systems in your plants? Do you have WMS systems? Do you have TMS systems? Do you have shipment visibility applications? Like the basic stuff that you should have if you want to really have an intelligent supply chain, the digital supply chain. And frankly, we have deficits there, and we're continuing to work on that. But if you want to do it well, you kind of have to put the basic stuff in. So that's that modernized capabilities piece. And that's part of what then allows you to unlock the value of the data, because those core systems generally are what generate the data that you're going to need if you want to do something a little bit more sophisticated. And the company's actually done a lot of investment, and the 5 stages of grief, and going through the data lake and all that. I was just sitting there going, wow, okay, yeah, I can relate to this. But we've moved a bit beyond that. But we do have a very significant investment in the data side of things. We created a data platform. We've created data teams that are specific to the domains, because without that data, you can't do the next pieces. But where it gets fun is the transformational side. And that's what we're talking about here, is how do you transform an organization at enterprise scale? How do you bring AI to life at enterprise scale for an organization? And we really think there's 2 steps to that for us. So after you get that foundational stuff in, after you start to get your data, you got to get visibility of what's happening across your supply chains. And so we're focusing, because just in seeing what's going on, in really understanding what's going on with my inbounds, what's going on with my distribution networks, what's happening at port, like what do I have going on? Fantastic value creation right there. But that anticipatory part, this is where the AI comes in. This is where you're starting to get out there and leverage this data in ways that people can't, to find things and make predictions and get in front of issues so that you don't have to be cleaning up messes all the time, you're heading them off. And in order to go after these 4 things, we said we need to have some structure, some type of framework that we can let people see how this looks and think about this in a way that will resonate on why do you need to have a platform to enable this, and how does it fit in what Cargill's already invested in. And so when you look at that framework on the right-hand side, that intelligent supply chain platform across the middle, that's the new piece. The other pieces, the digital customer interface above, We're still working on it. That's an ever-evolving thing, but there's been quite a bit of investment in platform there. In the pieces below, you can see the ERP, you can see the data platform I was talking about, and at the base of this thing is our business strategies and our end-to-end supply chain performance. And so those things have all been there, but what we were missing was the layer in the middle, the layer that allows you to scale, the layer that allows you to build applications on it that are built quickly, are built in a way that is standard so that you can actually have consistency across your portfolio, that are built to scale and built to connect. So think about it in a sense like Lego blocks, where you can build these applications that of their own right create significant value. But if you configure them correctly, you can plug a blue one with a white one and a green one on the end. You can decide that you want a 3-block long and a 4-block long and a 2-block long. Customize it to what you need for yours, but you build them on the platform so that you can reuse them and you can configure them how you want. So that's kind of how we've thought about setting up this intelligent supply chain. Now you got to figure out how you're actually going to do this. Great, we got the idea of a platform. We've got the idea that we want to be able to build these reusable applications that we're going to put on the platform and be able to configure in the way that we need them to be used for the various businesses, because they all do have different needs. And it's important that we're actually able to customize it for what they need for their markets, for their customers, because the biggest mistake that we've tried to make in any of these places is trying to do a one-size-fits-all. Does not work, cannot work. But you can have an underlying structure that will support all. So, and this is not a new concept for many of you, but I just want to share that this is the approach that we're taking, and so far it's working. And that is, in the past, the data science team would do their development, IT would come in and help kind of productize it, and then people would go back to their day job because they had done their work and built their application. And then we'd go and we'd try to move that to the next one, and we'd bring people back, and you'd usually get the same people back, but not always the same people, and it's in a new region, and you have to do something to try and figure out from scratch what you're doing. It's not ongoing. It's not continuous. It was kind of that science experiment, a little beyond that in my view, but it's that concept of we're going to do this one, and then we'll come back and we'll do another one. We need to move away from that if we want to be successful. We have to have continuity. We have to have people that do this every day and that have depth of experience, not just on the product side of things, but start to learn the supply chains. Start to understand the needs of the users. Start to understand the customers and what their expectations are. That depth of knowledge is important, and that continuity is important. And so what we've done is we've started to put together intelligent supply chain product teams. And these product teams will be using the same types of resources that we had before, but the difference is that they're now going to be plugged in to an ongoing product team that has responsibility both for the development of the application and the deployment of the application, and then over time, they'll also be responsible for maintaining it and making sure that it's continuing to improve over time. And so you can see the different folks that we have as part of that. And where C3 fits into this is C3 is plugged in, their COE team is plugged into that intelligent supply chain product team. They're helping us with product development. They're also helping us with the deployments at this point. Over time, our intention is that more and more of that is our team. We'll always have some C3 team with us, but as we're standing this up, we're leaning very heavily on C3 at the beginning with the intent that we'll move that over more to our team over time. And so those teams are being stood up right now. And all of this is structured around delivering against those business strategies that I showed you at the bottom of that framework, because this is, at the end of the day, about creating value for businesses, which is what you heard earlier today a couple of times. And that has been the key to making this work. And so where do you create value for your businesses? Well, the first step is to listen to your business. What is it that you aren't able to achieve today that you wish you could, that it would make sense for us to use this? And there's another filter, though, which is, we want to pursue applications that they have merit on their own standing. They are worth doing, even if you didn't do anything else. And we are picking applications that we believe have the opportunity to scale across Cargill. So you can get the best of both. Hey, even if it only worked here, it was still worth doing. The business has identified the need, they've agreed on the value, they're pulling us through, and we think we can take it across. The other thing that we're working on here is we're trying to make sure that we are doing this in a way that proves to the various components that I referenced earlier. So just because it works in planning doesn't mean it works in transportation. Just because it works in operations doesn't mean it works in procurement, or at least that would generally be the storyline you'd get. Just because it worked in Europe doesn't mean it'll work in Latin America. Just because it worked in protein doesn't mean it'll work in the agricultural supply chain. So we've chosen to kind of cover that matrix. Our first pilot was North America, beef. Our second one was in Latin America, agricultural supply chain. An upcoming one that we're working on is in Europe, in our food ingredients business. One of them is focused around production, one of them is focused around transportation, one of them is around demand forecasting for product. Translates back into procurement. If you think about that, we're starting to cover the globe, we're starting to cover the businesses, we're starting to cover the functions, and suddenly it's a lot harder to say, well, that won't work over here, because it works in a lot of places. And so let me talk just a little bit about the two initial use cases and where we went. So the first one is the one in production scheduling optimization. And in this one, the situation that we have is across Cargill, we have a variety of different solutions for production scheduling optimization. Optimization might not be the right word, detailed scheduling, maybe I'll say that. The optimization component is where this gets interesting. And it's where we found that the applications that we'd had up to this point didn't necessarily provide the flexibility or the optimization that we were looking for in our North America beef business. And so what we've done is gone through and made a very, very conscious choice. We did an evaluation of should we build it ourselves? Should we buy it off the shelf? Should we do this with C3? And we said, you know what? C3 is the way to go. Now, within this, there's a couple of things that really are helping make this work well. So one of them is the way that C3 approaches this. The customer focus, and in this case, the customer being the person who's going to use this application, is second to none. Different than what we've experienced in any other kind of deployment that we've done. This is one where they sit down, they make sure they understand it, and they are going through and iterating week over week. We proved this out in a 12-week pilot. By the time we got to the end of the 12 weeks, we said, you know what, we need to take this and move it towards being live. And so we're just now moving into that position of it's live, and the idea then is that we'd be able to scale. The second one that we did, and I'm conscious of time here, I'll make sure you guys get to lunch in time, is one around freight market intelligence. So this is another one. So production scheduling optimization, if you can get that to work, it can be something that we can scale across Cargill. And it is looking like we're going to be able to scale. The freight market intelligence is one for any industry that you're in. Knowing what your freight price is going to be at some point in the future is pretty helpful from a pricing perspective. There are certain models for us, though, where freight is the largest component of the cost. And so we're also having to bid a freight price fairly far in advance, up to 24 months in advance. And so getting more accurate about that allows us to do a better job of understanding both what's the capacity going to look like as well as what the pricing is going to look like to ensure that we're making the right kinds of decisions in terms of what we're offering for freight prices in the market. Now, this is another one where we've done a lot of work on this in the past, given that this is something that is so core to our business. We've put various algorithms against it. We have built models to do this, but the belief was, we should be able to do better. There's other data out there, there's other information that we could use that we don't use today. And so, earlier this morning when Tom was talking about the fact that, the data that you need isn't in your CRM, well, the data that you need isn't in your ERP. The data that you need isn't in your WMS. There is other information that you need to actually do a good job of making these kinds of predictions. And the good news for Cargill, because of that complexity of supply chain, the diversity that we have across the region, the different types of markets that we're in, we've got some really, really cool data that is our data. So it's proprietary, and we think it's going to give us insights that are unique. And so we're leveraging the AI to do that, to bring together all these massive data sets, crank through it, figure out what are the features that are actually driving it, and using that then to do a better job of predicting what's going to happen in freight. And so we're piloting this, as I said, in our agricultural business in South America, but this is something that we think we could move forward with globally. And so just to wrap this quickly, where do we think this goes from here? We're at the early stages. As I said, these are the first two that we're bringing into production. We have a lot more that we think we can do from the end-to-end perspective. We want to make sure that we do provide that visibility across. We want to make sure that we are providing those predictions and anticipating issues, communicating to customers proactively if something's happening, changing our schedules at our plants as things are happening on inbound. So I think about supply network risk. Optimizing and automating. We think that there's tremendous opportunity to optimize throughout all of our systems with this AI potential. And that the last piece of this is, for you to give the customer the right digital experience, you obviously need to have your data hooked up upstream, you need to have visibility upstream, and your digital experience is only as good as your physical experience. So we think this helps drive our physical experience for our customers as well. But the real thing here is all of these go back to this purpose of fulfilling a future need for those 10 billion people and doing it the right way with the help of this enterprise-wide AI transformation. So we're starting the journey, we're excited about it, and looking forward to seeing what comes next. But thank you for letting me share this with you today.